Welcome to Garden Valley Church Podcasts. We are so looking forward to having you join us today.
Well, hi guys. Welcome to the Youth Culture Podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to the Youth Culture Podcast. I'm here with Sam, my buddy. And we just had an amazing last episode. I'm super excited about the creation episode. So be sure to check that one out. It's 2 episodes before this one, episode 4. So today we're going to talk about something that I feel like in church culture is a conversation that we don't hear a lot about. I grew up pretty much coming to this church my whole life. But for the longest time, I always thought that when I messed up, I was going to be put to shame for it.
Right.
There's a great book by Danny Silk that's called Unpunished, and it's a book talking about not punishing. And this conversation is kind of about that, I think, a little bit. And so I'm going to hand it off to Sam. He's going to be asking some questions as we go along a little bit here and there. But I just want to start off asking Sam, what's it been like for you personally to kind of change your mindset from this idea of like being shamed,
right,
to having grace for people, and even in your own life?
Right. Yeah, I really struggled with this one early on in my walk with the Lord because it was hard for me to forgive people, especially people who have done me a lot of wrong. And so there was a time in my life where the Lord really put on my heart to start forgiving people so I can move forward and grow in the Lord. And I was like, Lord, this is going to be the hardest thing in my life because I hold grudges. And so walking through that, forgiving everybody and messaging them or calling them or talking to them face to face and genuinely forgiving them for what they did, it was completely unexpected for me specifically because it was just a burden off of my shoulders. And so when I was finished with that, the Lord came to me and he was like, now you need to forgive yourself. Because a lot of things it's not just a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And you either said something wrong or did something wrong as well. And you need to not only own up for their actions, but your actions, right? And so figuring out that forgiving myself is allowing the Lord to love on you and allow yourself to accept that love. Because we can't forgive unless the Lord helps us with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like truly forgive. Like I can be like, oh, I forgive you, but really in the back of my mind, I'm just like,
yeah,
okay,
sure.
So walking through that was very difficult and took me several years. And finally, I came to a place where understanding what forgiveness is and what shame is, and knowing that no matter what, the Lord is always going to love me, and that I need to love myself the same way He loves me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it was hard, and it's never an easy road to do that either.
Sure.
But it's a necessary one. So yeah.
It kind of goes back to that thing of, not just being a dangerous Christian or a dangerous man.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have that whole sermon, that whole thing you wrote, which I love. But also like being a dangerous woman of God. Like, can you talk to us a little bit about like how living that kind of lifestyle with grace instead of shame, how that makes you dangerous as a believer? For the enemy, of course.
Right. Not for like actual human beings.
Yeah, for sure.
Living dangerously is, in my understanding, is living by faith. And through that, He has asked us to do certain things in our life, which is love everyone the way we want to be loved. To love thy neighbor, right? And loving somebody like you love yourself, that's a hard concept to do. Because what do you do when you pray for yourself? You have a long list of all these things. Lord, help me with my grandma. I'm sick. I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
And then the Lord asks us to pray for other people, and then you have like, oh, Lord, help them. Like it's just a simple little prayer, but really He's asking us to pray the way we would pray for ourselves.
Right.
And I found that is also very difficult to do sometimes too, because you don't know the circumstances they're in. You don't know the hidden things within them that you need to pray for. And so really diving deep in that is finding the understanding and the faith of the Lord will help you through it all, and He will love you unconditionally.
Come on, dude.
And that He will truly redeem you of everything that you have done, as long as you believe in Him and that He died on the cross for you.
Yeah, right. That's awesome, man. And I think just kind of piggybacking on what you said, and I love that. When we come to God in prayer, it really changes the way that you see yourself,
Yeah.
changes the way that you see people, changes the way that you see a circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have a full podcast on just prayer and the importance of prayer.
Right.
Sometimes prayer looks like just listening, not coming to God with all my problems and my mistakes and etc., but just letting Him love on you.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times where just under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress to get a lot of things done, and that whole thing of anxiety, right? Like wrestling with anxiety. And there have been times where I've come into, here at GVC, just come into the sanctuary and sat, and everyone's praying out loud and they're going after it. And like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what's happening in the room. And God's like, actually, I want you to just sit here with me.
Right.
And in the middle of your anxiety and your fear, like feeling inadequate, because there have been so many times, and I've said this on a podcast before, but there have been so many times as a young youth director where I've felt like I'm not good enough, like I'm not fitting the part.
Right.
Am I really called to sit in this seat?
Mm-hmm.
But it's in that where that confidence comes, by sitting with Him and letting the grace come over me.
Yeah.
And understanding it's not anything that I could ever do to walk in this position that God has called me to walk in. But the thing is, at the same time, God doesn't shame me for feeling inadequate. He doesn't shame me for having anxiety.
Right.
And I think that the unconditional love of God, as we talked about a couple episodes before, is really what changes you. It's really what gives you a fresh perspective. And so, being in the church most of my life, I thought that every time I messed up, I was waiting for the paddle. I was waiting to get spanked for what I did. And I'll tell you a cool story. There was my mentor back in Redding, California, Mike Cruz. And I remember one of the first times, like, I messed up, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know I can share whatever on this podcast because it's my podcast, so I'm just going to share it. But I was really, really struggling in school ministry with lust and pornography.
Yeah.
And it was bad. Like, it was to the point where I would almost look for things anywhere I possibly could, almost like a addiction of some sort. Without going into a lot of detail, what ended up happening was I went to my pastor and I said, hey, I really need to talk to you about this because I'm struggling with this and I feel so much shame and guilt for what I've done.
Right.
Because I'm in a leading position with the youth as a youth intern, and I need to come to you and let you know what's going on. And I was expecting to be shamed for what I did because I was messing up and not. Yeah. But it was in that where he showed me what a culture of grace looked like. There was a time where I was back here during my high school years where I wasn't really submitting to authority. I was being a little bit rebellious and out. Had a girlfriend at the time and getting into trouble. And I came to one of my leaders and I was like, hey, I really need help. And I remember it was where Carl was basically like, I want to walk with you through this. And he actually walked with me to help me get out of some of those bad situations and habits. And I'm so thankful for just the people in my life who have helped me to keep me accountable and walk that out. Like, because as a believer, we struggle.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the most amazing thing that God does in that is he enables us to have grace so that we can actually walk that out. And so now I'm looking on the other side. I'm like helping other people walk through that,
Right.
what I struggled with for so long. And I think that's just the beauty of God's grace, is that I can never do it on my own,
Yeah.
you know? And so to be really practical, if you're watching this podcast and you're like, man, I got stuff in my life that I'm struggling with or I'm walking through, the best thing you can do is bring it out into the light and be accountable, but at the same time, understand that you don't have to divvy out your dirty laundry to everybody. Sometimes the best thing to do is to sit and allow God to actually fill you and to speak hope over you and speak life over you. And then from that place, you begin to walk that out and you begin to live empowered. And so I think that's why the church is so amazing, because when the church is healthy, when the church is fully operating out of the way that God actually designed the church to be, it's no longer just a hospital for people.
Right.
It's a place where they empower people, you know? So, but that all comes from that relationship with God.
Yeah, of course.
You know? So, yeah. So Sam, question for you. I think that those watching, especially the teens and the young adults, you know, they may connect to that. But I'm wondering for the parents, you know, or the grandparents or aunts and uncles, guardians, whatever. How do you approach those conversations when they know there's stuff going on with their kids or their, you know, nephews or whatever? How do they approach that from a place of grace, but not enabling them to sin? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I am a huge, huge advocator of loving the person and hating the sin,
Absolutely.
because we are all human. We all make mistakes. We all mess up. We all fumble. And so allowing yourself to love that person but hating that sin is a huge undertaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
A understanding that just because they've done X, Y, and Z, watch pornography or done drugs or whatever it might be, to understand that they are coming to you for help, for understanding, for guidance, for wisdom. And most of the time, in a lot of the cases, it's their last ditch effort.
Sure. Absolutely.
And showing them that you love them and care for them and understand that they are going through things will open up a door for the Lord to work within them and work through you.
Yeah.
And so
Build a deeper connection.
yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
And through that, it creates a generational connection, because not only are the grandkids going to be going to the grandparents for advice, going to go to the parents are going to go to the grandparents,
Sure.
and whatever may have you, that it will create that family bond, that church bond. Because I know several times, like you were saying, you would go to a pastor or somebody, an executive pastor, whoever it might be in the church, and then they don't shame you. Like, well, that's different, because the world is like, hide everything and pretend to be good.
Pretend to be good.
Right.
Yep.
And so seeing that in the church and seeing the love and seeing the grace, and that it's not a good thing, right? What you're doing is not a good thing, but that there's love to come out of it. And there's an understanding and there is a grace to come out of it.
And you walk people into wholeness, not that wholeness comes overnight.
Right.
You know, it's a process. Even Jesus with the disciples, you know, he chose Judas.
Mm-hmm.
He also chose him to take care of the money.
Right.
And, you know, there are times in life where God tests us, absolutely. At the same time, I think that it's interesting how Jesus was so intentional with those relationships. And he helped those disciples become who they became, like challenged them, spoke life into them. It was kind of like, but it was all a relationship.
Right.
And I think the idea of God being a God who shames comes out of a place of lack of intimacy with God,
Right.
versus spending time with the Lord and beginning to unpack. We could spend our entire lives and never know God. We can never taste God because we haven't actually spent the time sitting and waiting and allowing him to speak and allowing him to affirm who we are and our identity. And from that place, everything flows.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. That is so good. You were talking about a few days ago about, I believe it was Peter,
Mm-hmm.
and Jesus was like, "You're going to deny me 3 times." Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic? Because I feel like that whole story is about grace and about love.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that in the one podcast with Brian, but I think that what's interesting, or maybe it wasn't Brian, but anyways, all let's say, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. We know that. What's interesting is one of the last things Jesus does before he goes up to be with the Father is he actually restores Peter. He says to Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" How many times do we come to God, right? And we're like,
Daily.
I did all, yeah, right. I did all this stuff. God, look at me, all this stuff. Do you love me? God, of course you know I love you. I'll do anything for you. Feed my sheep. You want me to pick up the dog poo? You want me to,
Yeah.
I mean, they're sheep,
Right.
dude. They're
Right.
messy. They're smelly. Feed my sheep. That's the first time. Again. Peter, do you love me?
Right.
God, you know I love you. I'm devoted to you. I'm spending my entire life. I'm giving my life to you.
Mm-hmm.
Then feed my sheep. That's 2. Peter, do you love me? There's that story with Elijah where he has one of the most amazing victories on Mount Carmel. And God shows up, man. Like,
Right.
whoa, fire comes, like burns like crazy, kills all the prophets of Baal. It's a crazy story. It's one of the most amazing stories in the Bible. And after one of the greatest victories, he goes into hiding. And it says that there was earthquakes, and it says there was thunder and fire and all this stuff, but God was not in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then God came in a whisper to Peter. Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me?" Jesus says that. He says, "Yes, Lord." Here's where he restores him. He says, "You will be the one that will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand." The place where they were standing, was one of the darkest places, whatever, portals to hell, whatever you want to call it. And the gates of hell will not stand.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's
He
crazy.
declares and he prophesies and he speaks into who Peter is, into his identity. And it's in that where Jesus restores him.
Right.
Yet, just a few days prior, just a while back prior, he denied Jesus 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it like God to restore us back into wholeness like that? He doesn't shame him.
No.
He doesn't beat him up. He doesn't. Bad Peter, right?
Right. Right.
I love the way Pastor Craig says that. He's not like bad Peter, He's like, I'm going to love you into wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that like God?
Yeah.
So, I want to do something. If you're watching this, I just want you to close your eyes for a sec as Sam and I are closing our eyes. And I want that peace to just touch you. Feel the peace of God coming over you. sense his affirmation over you. You are so loved. You are so valuable. You could never walk away from God's love. No matter what you do, no matter where you've been, you can always come home. Thank you, Jesus. Okay, I want you to open your eyes. Doesn't that feel good?
Feels great. Honestly, it feels wonderful.
In the chaos of life, sometimes it's good to just sit and be still. I love that verse that says, "Be still and know that I am God."
Right.
The word know there, Hebrew word, to be still and know that he is God, is to know him intimately. As we were talking in the other episode about like God breathing the breath of God into us versus man's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
In that whole story, there's the breath of man that did not have the breath of God. Because they had sinned, they had defiled themselves,
right.
and yet, so God wiped out all that craziness, the flood, where it wasn't like that in the garden. In the garden, it was like this. It was between man and God, constantly in relationship. And it was from a relationship of grace. Then, what we find is in creation, where God breathes his very essence or DNA into him. It's almost like the sperm of God creating us, right? Like that
Right.
idea. That's what it means to know God.
Right.
To be still and know. To be filled with the knowledge, to be filled with the understanding, to have the identity that he is God.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I like that. There's a passage in Hebrews, I believe 13, somewhere in Hebrews 13, I believe 13, where it talks about the dangerous men of God. And it gives a long list of people and then kind of some of their works and what they did. And but a lot of people don't look at who they were before they found God or had God really resonating in their life. And a lot of them are murderers. A lot of them are thieves. And there's even one person on that list of people in Hebrews that committed human sacrifice.
wow.
And you would think, wow, that's ludicrous. But yet God still used these people
Come on.
to do amazing works within his church. But he can only have done that through redemption and through grace and through love and through understanding that we are humans, that we mess up and we fumble
A lot.
a lot, daily for me at least.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
So it's crazy to think that the God of everything will still allow us to mess up and work through that and redeem us through that and do great things through that.
And that he sustains us through it all.
Yeah.
It's just amazing that in the beginning, right, when God created the world, he spoke it, let there be light, and there was light. And it went out. The Holy Spirit and God, they're all doing this and creating it. And those words are still being sustained today, holding the world up,
Right.
holding us together. And God prophesying over and declaring over who we were. I love, that verse that says, "I knew you before you were even in your mother's womb." I felt like God showed me a picture before of him crafting us in heaven before we were even a thought. And at first it was like this little light thing.
Right.
Right? And then like the dust, because we're made from dust, right? So like the dust comes and then and it's almost like this like tornado thing.
Yeah.
But then it's like clay, because it talks about like the potter and the clay and like all that kind of stuff. And as he's weaving and as he's he's doing this, creating, and there's like love, and there's, you're amazing. I created you with such intention and right? And he's like prophesying, speaking over, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And not to say like this is going to be the exact path and you're never going to change it, because God gives us free will, which is a whole other conversation for another time. But isn't it amazing that even though we can do all these things and even move through life, God still has a plan and a purpose for our life. And eventually that leads home.
Right.
And if we can understand that, you can enjoy the ride.
Right.
You don't have to be afraid that you're doing all these things wrong or you've missed the mark.
Right.
You could be 93 years old and still get to that purpose.
Right. Right.
Because God has a way. He's the way maker. Like, he's the one that, with Moses, made the way where there was no way, literally parted the waves so that the children of Israel could walk through and completely swallowed up the enemies. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But in that, it's like, God is so much bigger and so much more intimate than I think what we could even realize.
He only does that through grace, because he knows, again, we're gonna mess up.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's really amazing. So, you have any closing thoughts?
No.
It was awesome. Guys, thanks for joining us on this episode. We'll see you in another one. Hope you have an amazing day. We'll see you later. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're interested in checking out more of our podcasts as they come available, please download our app in your device's app store or check us out on your podcast platform at Garden Valley Church. We look forward to seeing you next time.